So the conference today is entitled Modernising Police, and in the literature you may have read in advance it says reform is critical and that a radical redesign of workforce strategy and public accountability is required in this era of austerity. It goes on to say the challenge will have to be to reorganise and collaborate more effectively and prioritise the core services that the police provide. Also, that forces must ensure value for money is achieved, efficiencies are successfully implemented, and frontline staff are focused, free from bureaucracy and centralised targets. But in practice, what does modernising the police actually mean? All too often, it appears to mean cost-cutting rather than modernising or improving processes. There is a tendency, particularly amongst our friends in the media, to assume that when we talk about modernisation, it means that the service isn't doing something right, or worse still, the service is failing. But you only have to look at the British Crime Survey and the quarterly crime statistics to see there is actually much good in policing. A fall of 9% in crime last year alone. And interestingly, the significant fall in crime of up to a half in 15 years has largely gone unrecognised. And I would just ask, if those figures had shown a rise of 50%, I'm sure there would now be some finger-pointing. There's also been a tendency to slash and burn, and let's just take a moment to consider recent events to address the country's fiscal situation. We know the comprehensive spending review hit the policing budget very hard to say the least, with cuts to the magnitude of 20%, and they have the potential to destroy policing as we know it. We know that the HMIC, the Magistrates Inspectorate Constabulary, warned earlier this year that cuts beyond 12% would result in service delivery being affected. Yet the government chose to ignore this. What this signifies more than anything else is the value or not, as it seems, that the government places on public safety and public harm. We realise cuts are necessary due to the economic crisis the country is in, and we remain astonished that policing has not been considered to be a protected priority area by the government. And in such challenging and uncertain times, expectation on the front line are higher than ever. Policing is a career and a vocation we do with pride, and public safety is our priority. Therefore, the government should have guarded against eroding what has taken decades to establish. The police service faces many challenges and resilience issues. A number of forces have already announced their intention to use Regulation A19 of the police pension regulations to retire officers with more than 30 years' service. And by the Home Office's own estimations, we could see 5,000 of Britain's most experienced police officers of all ranks being forced into early retirement within the next year. Now, some senior officers are trying to justify this, saying that they are making way for new recruits. Yet it is a regulation that does not apply to them, and virtually all forces have frozen recruitment, a fact I think reinforced last week by some work that the Labour Party, the opposition, did. What is absolutely clear, we will undoubtedly have to do more with less. At a time when we are facing more policing challenges than ever, as a service, we do not need to lose valuable, skilled officers. We are also now less than 2 years away from the Olympics in 2012. These again will bring a whole host of policing challenges, not least the increased threat of terrorism. This begs the question, how much reform can the service take at this time without jeopardising public safety? The new coalition government has made it clear... Is that a ghost? The new coalition government has made it clear that it sees the police role purely as fighting crime. The reality is that police officers deal with a multitude of tasks that every day fall outside this remit, including the care and welfare of vulnerable citizens in society. You got a job there, I think. I think we're there. Budget cuts could mean that areas not covered adequately by other agencies, such as dealing with people on the streets with mental illness, drug and alcohol issues and missing person inquiries, will be the ones that suffer. Is it time that these predominantly health issues are dealt with elsewhere and with departmental budgets to match? Is it now time that the mentally ill and those with chemical addictions are considered as a health issue rather than a statistic within the criminal justice system? The big question is, what is it we stop doing as a service? Whilst we are expected to suffer the consequences of such savage cuts, as police officers, we also are expected to pick up the pieces in the communities we serve. That is why there should have been a full and proper consideration of what is best for the public and what is best for policing. We appear to have our ducks out of order. Has anyone actually considered what the police should be doing? Are the public happy that the police service focus is purely fighting crime? And what are the police no longer going to do? What is desperately needed is a full and independent review of policing. Ourselves as a police federation have since 1999 been calling for an independent review, a public royal commission into policing. In that time we have seen, the ghost is back by the looks of it. In that time, we have seen and continue to see a piecemeal approach to police reform, to modernisation. What we should have had is we could have had the results of a proper, thorough assessment. We could have asked the people what they want and what they expect from the police service. We could have looked at our processes. Should the police still be dealing with, for example, nearly 200,000 common assaults a year, a crime without an injury, and which would not be considered a crime elsewhere, and that costs in excess of £50 million a year? Tim Godwin, the Deputy Commissioner of the Met, has for a long time been an advocate of the blue team idea, where the inefficiencies are caused by mainly external bodies and the processes we use, and I'm sure Jan Berry this afternoon will explain more in her presentation. I've also heard some chief officers advocate that they can no longer adhere line by line to the ACPO manual on road deaths and the so-called murder manual, and that greater discretion will have to be given to officers to deal with such cases because there no longer will be the resources available. So in summary, and hopefully to instigate some lively debate in the coming hours, this is simply how I see it. 18 months ago, the coalition government partners were competing to outbid each other on officer numbers, with one promising 3,000 extra officers and the other 10,000 extra officers. Complicit in all this were the Association of Chief Police Officers, who encouraged the dash for more officers, and they were supported by police authorities who were willing to supply them and raise precepts to pay for them. However, anyone reading the ACPO and the APA submissions to the Windsor Review of Police Officers and Staff Terms and Conditions would be forgiven if they are a little confused. From my reading, both organisations now submit that we don't need any more officers. In fact, we need less, with promises of efficiency savings and modernisation. If that is the case, then they have been profligate in the past with public money, and why haven't they said so before? One of today's speakers is Roger Baker, sat here at the front. When he was Chief Constable of Essex, and with the support of the Police Authority Chairman Robert Chambers, he implemented the APECH project, and through efficiency savings funded an extra 240 officers. And I emphasise additional because he reinvested the savings he made, whereas there now appears to be an inevitability and defeatist attitude that officer and staff numbers must fall. Why is that? The government also promises modernisation and more from less, and a dogmatic approach to reform which will see the abolition of police authorities. Now, we are all adults and we understand the fiscal state of the country. So let's have some good old-fashioned honesty. Is modernisation simply a euphemism for budget cuts? If, as we suspect it is, let's say it as it is. Only last week, politicians complained about FIFA's lack of transparency when England lost its bid to host the 2018 World Cup. But are we not in a similar place? The government has coined several mantras for policing: more for less, concentrating on crime and antisocial behaviour, protecting the front line, and the latest, that officer numbers have no effect on crime rates. But what they have failed to supply is any instructions as to how all this will be achieved. And do they add up? And can this be achieved? I'm sure that we may have some ideas by the end of the day.